Hello and welcome to another episode of Just Roll With It Reviews, where today we are going to be taking a look at the games in front of me. And specifically, we're going to be taking a look at games that are going to be leaving my collection. Some of these actually have already left my collection, and once this video is done, I'm going to be shipping them out and getting them to their new homes. I wanted to make this video, hopefully it'll be a pretty short video, but I wanted to make this video because, I've been looking at purging about a shelf's worth of games for a while. I have a shortage of games, as you all know, and as you can see behind me, but I've been wanting to get rid of some that just don't get played, because I would rather use that money that I can make off the games that I do sell in order to buy new ones and that will get played and aren't just going to sit on the shelf and collect dust and, things like that. So I'll go through each one of these things, each one of these games, and then for each one I'm going to try to provide examples of games that have sort of replaced them, giving a rationale for yeah, this game is fine, but the reason I'm getting rid of it is because I like this game better, or these games also do very similar things, and therefore I just don't like this game as much. I don't think it does those things as well, and so it's moving on. So I wouldn't say any of these games are bad. I have sold games that I actually think are bad before. I didn't own this, but games like Legendary, I did not like Stone Age. There are games that I genuinely was just like, nope, this is a bad game. I don't think any of these are bad games. I think they're just games that, as time has passed, there are better versions of these games. There are games that work better for me. So, without further ado, let's start with the first game. Alright, so the very first game we're taking a look at here is Carcassonne. The games we're looking at, not really in any particular order, and especially some of these first few ones that I do are going to be very quick. Carcassonne, it's a tile-laying game. You are laying tiles, sort of a medieval theme. This is a very old copy that I think I paid like $5 for. But you're laying tiles down, taking turns with other players, and then you're placing meeples on those tiles in order to score points. And the different tiles score differently, so you can sort of there's bits of the tiles that'll have castle pieces, and if you can completely enclose the castle, you score points. There's roads, there's all sorts of ways to score points. There are loads of expansions for this and new additions. It's definitely a very, very classic game that lots of people have played. Again, by no means a bad game. I've played it a couple of times. It's been quite a while, but I found it to be okay. Specifically, games that have replaced this for me, and why I'm just deciding to get rid of it, is a friend of mine owns Small Islands. To me, Small Islands is just a better version of Carcassonne. It's definitely different. It's not exactly the same game, but it's a very similar, it uses the tile-laying theme. There are various ways to score points. You have, one of the things that I really like is you actually have hidden objectives, and you can you're basically building, well, as the name implies, small islands, and anyone can place pieces on the island, but the island can only be scored once, and so, as you're adding, you have these secret objectives of things that you want to be on the island, icons you want to be represented. So you want to have as many of those as possible, and so there's a timing thing of ooh, when do I score that island, because it can only be scored once, so that it gets the most points for my secret objective. There's also ports, little port icons on the islands, and so if there's an area with a whole bunch of those, you can place your boat, but you can only place each player can only place their boat once per game. I don't know, just something about the art, the theme, yeah, it doesn't matter a ton. It's a relatively abstract game, but it comes across better to me. Eventually I'd like to get Small Islands. I'm not in any rush. Again, Bradley, my friend, has it. But to me, I don't see myself playing this. If I'm going to play a tile-laying game, I'm going to play Small Islands, or even Land vs. Sea for that matter. Land vs. Sea is it's more or less a two-player game, but it can also be played at 3 and 4. And as it sounds, instead of being squares, though, like this is four-sided squares, the tiles in Land vs. Sea are hexagons. One player plays as land and is trying to complete little islands, and the other one plays as sea and is trying to complete enclosed areas of water. And the scoring in that one's very simple. It's really nice artwork. It's actually, I believe, designed by the same person who did the art, so one person did the whole thing. Don't quote me on that. But it's also really quick. Scoring is easy. There's like little caravans and ships, and there's one thing where you just need to have the majority between the two players in order to score, and so you're kind of competing that way. But yeah, again, it just like, to me, it's just like, it's nice and simple, and I would just always choose that over Carcassonne. So that's it for Carcassonne. That's why Carcassonne is leaving the collection. All right, our next game that I am getting rid of should be even quicker than the last one, and that is Bang, specifically The Walking Dead Bang. So back when I first started getting into board games, one of the first games that we played was Bang. Bang, Codenames, Forbidden Desert, Pandemic were all very early on into Chrononauts. We're all really early on into our board gaming careers. There's a local bookstore that was having a sale because this game was damaged, and I think I got it for around $5, $10 maybe. Either way, it's essentially just Bang with a Walking Dead theme. I don't believe that there's any like functional differences. There's the same roles, everything. So it's Bang. And Bang is fine. I've kind of had some comments about Bang before. I also own the Bullet version of Bang, which like I would always play. Like this is just never going to get played. I guess this is a little bit nicer for portability's sake, whereas the Bullet is not so portable. But yeah, it's just never going to get played. I don't really care about The Walking Dead anymore. I was unfortunately one of those people that was into the show when it came out, and then by season 4 or something, I had been like, wow, this is terrible, and moved on with my life. But yeah, Bang has its issues. I don't like the player elimination, so I don't actually have any replacements for something like this. I'm trying to, list games that I think are better, but Bang is Bang. I don't know. It's not a bad game. It's a decent party game. I still don't like the player elimination, but the rest of it is fine as party games go. Just don't need this one anymore. So this one's leaving the collection. All right, for our next game leaving the collection, I now see that it is very dusty. Just probably a good reason for it to leave in and of itself, that it's just covered in dust because it hasn't been played. And that is Betrayal at House on the Hill. I think, yes, I am actually saying it. It has, I don't know. I always used to think it was like, doesn't matter. This is a game where everyone is cooperating at the beginning to explore a mansion. Pretty cool. You're moving around, you're leveling up your character's stats, you're exploring the mansion, building it out, so, it's based on tiles. You're encountering random little events and things, you're collecting items and things, and then eventually there is a point in the game where someone will roll the proper dice to cause a haunt to start. And I believe it's every time after an omen card or an event or something like that, after every event, you roll dice, and it becomes increasingly more likely. It's been a while since I played this one as well, as I said. And whenever someone rolls those dice, they basically look at the book, and then based on like what room they're in and what item they have that triggered the haunt, I think, a specific person, not necessarily the person who triggered it, becomes the haunt. And basically is trying to kill the other players. So there's a sort of traitor mechanic. It's fun in concept. It's fun in theory. This is the second edition. A third edition just came out, which, from what I've heard, maybe fixes some of the issues with this one. But this game definitely has some problems. Chiefly among them is going to be the fact that some of the haunts are just straight up broken. You can get into situations where, because of where someone spawns, it's basically impossible for either the survivors or the haunt to survive. So it's like basically just predetermined that because of where the haunt started, the survivors win, or vice versa. I've personally had this happen with a game that I played with my family where we had all just gone into the basement. My mother triggered the haunt or became the haunt. Either way, she became the haunt. And her objective was to kill everybody. And our objective was to simply lock her in the basement. She was already in the basement, in the room that she needed to be in, and start her on fire and leave. And we were literally able to do that before she ever even got to take a turn as the haunt, just because of how it worked out. You could say incredibly unlucky. I say not very good game design. And the problem is that you run into these situations a lot. Not quite as drastic. That one was like basically she literally had no chance. There was nothing she could do about it. But there are a lot of circumstances in this game where you can end up in situations where it's basically just impossible for one side or the other to win, because the fact that the map that you're building out is random, right? Like you have like 3 or 4 starting tiles. I think if you have like the stairs, like the foyer, and like a hallway, and everything else is random. The floors, the basement, all that stuff is random. So a lot of the haunts are heavily dependent on where people are, and like, because usually the survivors are just trying to escape. They don't need to kill anything. It depends on the haunt. And then the other major problem with this game is that it's the haunts themselves are not particularly well balanced, but they are also sometimes really confusing to understand, like the rules. And yeah, this is a relatively light game, but nothing feels worse than feeling like you're being cheated out of being able to, win or follow the rules properly. And especially in like a 1v all, you want to make sure you're understanding the rules properly, otherwise one side is going to feel slighted. And there's a lot of situations where the rules just are not particularly clear, to, I think, ones that are just kind of straight up broken. Like, they just don't make sense, they're not balanced, and it feels like a quantity over quality approach to gameplay. There's a lot of really cool ideas in this game. I like the trader. I like the fact that you're exploring a mansion. It looks really cool. But at the end of the day, it just has so many issues that I just don't find myself choosing to play this one. Not to mention the fact that my parents own it. So if I ever did want to play it again, I could. But I may as well sell this one and get some money for it. The last thing, I suppose, would be games that I feel sort of scratch the same itch, or that one of the reasons I've decided to replace this game or get rid of it. I don't have any that are exactly the same, where it's the, cooperative and then becomes 1v all. That, I think, is pretty unique to this game. But similar vibes would be something like Mansions of Madness, which, yes, is purely cooperative and does not have a traitor, usually. There are some slight potential random trader mechanics with going insane in Mansions of Madness, but for the most part, it's a cooperative game. To me, Mansions of Madness is an amazing game. Not only is it scenario-based, but the scenarios are all replayable because it randomizes like where items are. If it's like a whodunit murder mystery kind of thing, it randomizes who the culprit is. So it's different every time, and you can still replay it and enjoy it, even though there's only I shouldn't say only, there's 17 scenarios, I think, total, and it doesn't appear that Fantasy Flight's putting out any new content, or that Fantasy Flight is still alive. Please, someone send help. I'm not sure anyone's alive at that company anymore now that Asmodee bought it. But Mansions of Madness for a while was a huge thing. There's loads of expansions for it. Each expansion is themed around a specific thing. So if you're really into planes, trains, and automobiles, there's an expansion that's called Horrific Journeys. That's there's 3 scenarios in it: train, dirigible, and boat. There's like a snake cult in the jungle one that has 3 different scenarios all based around like that, sort of like Aztec architecture and jungle things. So it's very thematic. And it has the same kind of mechanics as Betrayal at House on the Hill, with none of the like broken, imbalanced stuff, because the game is app driven and knows where things are and how long it's taking you. And usually it's basically there's not a set number of rounds, but the game will slowly increase the difficulty if you take too long to do something, and then eventually kill you if you do take unreasonably long. But it has that same kind of vibe of exploring a haunted mansion, but much stronger story. And much more interesting, and there's even some cool puzzles on the app. As an app game goes, it's very well integrated and it makes sense. So yeah, and then one more sort of like alternate recommendation. Again, not exactly the same, because Mansions of Madness does not have any of the betrayal stuff really. Like I said, technically there's a couple of insanity conditions where other players may be trying to sabotage you, but that's not the same as like a full-blown traitor. So if you're really into like the 1v all type things, or not even 1v all, but like traitors versus humans and having those hidden identities, another great game would be either Unfathomable or the original version of Unfathomable, which has the Battlestar Galactica theme, which is just Battlestar Galactica the board game. That one is out of print, unfortunately, for people who are fans of that. But if you like the horror theme, the Lovecraft theme, Unfathomable is the basically re-implementation of that game now that Fantasy Flight does not have the rights to the Battlestar Galactica theme. And it is a fantastic hidden traitor game where, specifically with Unfathomable, you're all basically people aboard a ship that is going across the ocean, and the survivors, there's usually a hidden traitor, and even there may not actually start as a hidden traitor, but by the second sort of act of the game, there will be one. You basically start with one role, and then everyone gets dealt out an additional role, and so if there wasn't already a traitor, there could either be one traitor or a second traitor if two different people got the traitor cards, things like that, and it varies. But the traitors are essentially trying to subtly sabotage the boat and make sure that it doesn't reach its destination. And the survivors are basically trying to maintain the boat and keep it from sinking as like Mother Hydra and Father Dagon are attacking it and trying to pull the passengers overboard and destroy various facets of like the machinery and things. And it has a really cool, one of the coolest ways I've ever seen this represented in a game, where all players basically, when you have to do a skill check, there's a deck of randomized skill cards. I think it's like 2 of each card in the deck. And then all players can contribute however many cards they want of their skill stuff into the deck, and then it gets all shuffled up. And then you flip it over and you see like how many of the contributing skills, meaning skills that help pass it, versus the negative, and then if like the net score equals enough to pass the test, then you do. But the really cool thing about that is it allows the traitor to be more bold in what they put in, because in a lot of games there's not that like random buffer of cards for traitor. Because if somebody puts like 3 cards into the deck of like a 6-card deck, right? Everybody else put 1 and they put 3. Well, it's pretty obvious to see who the traitor is. But with this game, having that nice pool of buffer cards means that it is a lot easier to hide as the traitor when contributing cards, because it can still look like, oh, you put 3 cards in, and yeah, maybe you were the traitor, but we have a whole bunch of really good contributing cards, and so we just assume like, oh, you put in a whole bunch, and you could claim that you put in a whole bunch, and thus make it harder to detect you. So, fantastic game. It's, again, not exactly the same as Betrayal at House on the Hill, but has a similar mechanic. So, yep, that's why that one is moving on. Alright, our next game that is leaving the collection is Dominion. This is a very classic game. I'm not going to leave this one sitting up because all the cards are going to fall out and it's a nightmare. But it is a pure deck building game, and it is a very classic one, and it is a very good one, where basically you start with a basic deck of cards, basically just money and then victory points, which are called like provinces. And your goal in the game is you'll have like a whole bunch of different cards, and there's all sorts of cards in here to pick from. And you don't play with all of them. I think you play with like 6 or so. I'm trying to remember the exact number, but there's a certain number of cards that you put out. and it's basically stacks of all those cards. And what you can do on your turn is use your gold to buy those cards, and then those cards do different things. But by default, you can buy one card and play one card. And so those cards may allow you to buy more cards. Like it'll say +2 buys, which means now you have 3 buys. And so if you have a lot of money, you can buy more cards. Or you could get a card that's like +2 plays. I think they call them actions, but then it allows you to play a total of 3 action cards. And so there's a lot of chaining, and essentially what you're trying to do is get more money into your deck, which you can buy, and then use that money to buy better action cards that then allow you to... You're building a little engine that allows you to buy the victory point cards, and once, I think it's just any one deck of victory point cards, they have different values, runs out, that's the end of the game, and you score points. You see who has the most victory points. By no means a bad game, like I said. I have played with a couple of the expansions. The expansions are very good. I enjoyed them. But I think the big thing for this one, for me, is I don't love the scoring. It encourages a little too much finding one thing to exploit and then just exploiting it. And yeah, like the overall design of the game, it's a nitpicky thing. It doesn't look amazing. Even like the newer editions look not great. The art is not phenomenal. The theme also really isn't there. It's just sort of a light medieval theme, but that has nothing to do with like buying cards and actions and things. So for me, what has completely replaced this game is Valley of the Kings, which is a phenomenal game. It plays very similarly. But in that one, the scoring gimmick is very different. So instead of having a whole bunch of cards that are available to everybody like in decks that you can just buy from until they're gone, Valley of the Kings has 2 different like tiers of cards that you all shuffle together. So you shuffle all like the tier 1 and the tier 2 cards together, put them in a stack like that. So once you get through all the tier 2 cards, then you'll start doing the tier 3 cards. But it's the cards you can purchase are from a pyramid, and you can only buy from the bottom of 3 cards in the pyramid, and then there's a set of 2 and a set of 1. And then when you buy a card, the cards above it crumble into position, and then you refill on the top of the pyramid. So there's a whole strategy to like which ones you buy, because if you know an opponent really wants one, you may not, like that's like the second tier of the pyramid, you may not want to buy the one underneath it, because then it crumbles down and then they could buy it on their turn. And then the other cool thing that is different than Dominion is that you have 1 Entomb action during your turn, which means you can take one of the cards from your hand and basically lose it for the rest of the game. But that is also the only way you score points. At the end of the game, you don't score all the stuff in your deck, where Dominion, all those like crap, well, they're not crap, but the victory point cards that you need in order to win the game clog up your deck. In Valley of the Kings, there's no just cards that clog up your deck as victory points. All the cards have effects and things, like they're worth money, they're worth effects. So it's this constant decision of like, ooh, in order to score in this game, I have to put the card in my tomb. But this card it's really good. It has a really good ability, or it's worth a lot of money to buy other cards, and so you have to make a conscious choice to take that card out of your deck and set it aside for scoring at the end of the game. To me, that is a small but massive in terms of enjoyability and replayability when it comes to the game. Like, sure, Dominion's fine, but having those cards that are just dead, essentially dead cards in your deck, and even like money and victory points both, I mean, Valley of the Kings, the money is just incorporated into the abilities on the card. So if you have a card that's a really good ability, it's probably worth a lot of money, and you choose, do I want to use it to buy another card, or do I want to use it for its ability? And yeah, and then scoring at the end of the game, like I said, you take all of your cards that are in your tomb at the end of the game, and you are basically set collecting. So you want to have as many of you as you can of of each color of cards. So you'll have, I think it's like 8 or something different colors, like blue, green, yellow, and you want to have as many sets of those as you can. So if you have one, it's worth. I think it's the number of cards that you have of the same color squared with no duplicates. That's very important. Any duplicate named cards that you have in there don't count. You get to score each set of colors once with no duplicates. And it's super simple. It's the number of cards you have in the set squared. So if you have 3 of a color, 9 points. And yeah, so, sorry, whinging about Valley of the Kings. My opinion, incredibly underrated game. The premium edition is great, even though it's tarot-sized cards. I think it's kind of cool that they're tarot-sized. I wish they would make a version with the new art, because I really like the form factor of the original, but the art isn't as good. Premium edition has fantastic art, but it's not as portable as the original, just regular-sized standard cards. But they're both fantastic. Highly recommend them. Dominion's not a bad game. It's just not as good as Valley of the Kings, for me. All right, so next one that is leaving the collection that we have here is Ascension deck building game. This was also something I purchased a very long time ago and have not played it for quite some time, which is why it's leaving the collection. I don't remember it being terribly bad, but Ascension deck building game is basically a game where 2 players are going... Actually, can this go... Oh, it can go to 4. All right, did not realize that. 2 to 4 players, sorry, are going head-to-head. And again, it's a pure deck building game, a lot like Dominion. But the 2 to 4 players, are starting with a set of basic cards, just like in something like Dominion or Valley of the Kings. There's going to be an offering out in front of you of cards that you can buy and monsters you can kill. And the goal is to get these little gems and use your cards to buy other cards and kill monsters. Very simple deck builder, very simple rules. And the person who kills the most monsters at the end of the game wins. Not terrible. One of those games I do not like the art for. I've heard it used to be even worse. This is the 3rd edition of the game. Not a bad game. Just doesn't get played. I'm not a huge fan of the, it's competitive, but you're also just kind of fighting the game. There's not really a lot of interaction from what I remember. But this one has been basically just completely replaced by things like Valley of the Kings, or if you want something that's a little bit more close to this, maybe like... not even that, really. I guess maybe Netrunner would be close. Netrunner's awful to learn, but I do really like the game. It's still not the same as this. I don't really have any games aside from just like pure deck builders that are exactly the same, but Netrunner, you get to build your deck, and it's, it's an asymmetric game, and you're fighting each other, and it's much heavier, but like something like that. Or if you want just kind of like a head-to-head game that's only 2 players, I guess Keyforge would be a good one. You can get I've talked about this before, Keyforge is a head-to-head like lane battler made by the same guy who made Magic. To me, it is a better game than Magic. I was kind of when I played Magic. But Keyforge, you're basically getting a generated deck, so a deck that was generated by a computer algorithm. So every deck is entirely unique in the game. That doesn't mean that there aren't, duplicate cards, because obviously they have a specific card pool that they pull from, but no deck is supposed to be exactly identical. You choose a deck, you fight against each other, you're trying to forge keys by getting these little ember tokens, and once you get enough, you can forge a key. If you forge 3 keys, and you're the first one to do it, you win the game. But the lane battler portion is the part that is most reminiscent of Magic, and you're playing allies down. But the interesting thing about the game, and the thing that makes the game good, if it didn't have this, I don't think Keyforge would be very good. But the best part of Keyforge is that on your turn, every deck is made up of 3 factions or like races. So you might have Roman dinosaurs and demons. They have a name, I don't remember what they are, but they're like demons, or these like futuristic robots. So that may be your deck. Well, on your turn, you name one of those 3 that's in your deck, and you can only play from your hand or activate, meaning like attack or defend, with cards from that faction. And to me, that's what makes the game interesting and fun and gives you interesting situations and like strategy. But yeah, again, not really exactly like Ascension. Ascension is definitely very different. I think even like something like Star Realms to me is better than Ascension, and that's kind of similar. I don't know. It's not a bad game. The art doesn't super appeal to me, and I just haven't had a desire to play it. So that is why it's leaving the collection. All right, only four more games to go, but we're getting there. Next one leaving the collection is Seven Wonders. This is another classic game that I think was purchased pretty early on. Again, by no means a bad game. It is a game for 2 to 7 players where you're all basically competing to build one of the 7 wonders. And you're doing that by basically drafting cards. So everyone's going to start with a hand of cards. They'll pick one. If you're not familiar with drafting, everyone will pick one card from their hand of cards and then pass their hand to the person next in clockwise order. Then they'll get, everyone will get a new hand of cards from the person to their right. They'll pick another card and then they'll do it again. They'll just keep passing until, whenever the game decides you don't do that anymore. And then all those cards you draft do different things. Like there's military cards, so you can like fight other people and take their money. There's like artifacts cards that give you different symbols, and you can score those at the end of the game. There's one that just straight up give you victory points. There's ones that like give you money based on how many of those like resources that your opponents have, your neighboring civilizations. There's just straight up resources that you can use to like build the pieces of the wonders and stuff like that. It's a good game. It's fine. But I have to be honest, I have not played it in forever. Not really one that my game group is shouting to get to the table. And to be incredibly, incredibly frank, this has been entirely replaced by Seven Wonders Duel. I was very skeptical of Seven Wonders Duel. I'm skeptical of any like 2-player versions of a regular game, because to me it's usually just like a simplified version of the regular game, so it's like, why wouldn't I just play the regular game? Seven Wonders Duel, in my opinion, is a superior game, and it is very similar. You still have like the different types of cards, like resources and military and stuff, but I think it's a better civilization game, if that makes sense. You're still trying to construct wonders, but those are not what wins you the game. There is like a science victory, there's a military victory, there's all kinds of different victories. And the really cool thing is like drafting with 2 players wouldn't really work very well, because it basically like you choose a card, give it to your opponent, you give your hand to your opponent, then they give you their hand, and you just keep going back and forth. No, you don't do that in Seven Wonders Duel. But what they have is a card pyramid with certain cards face up and certain cards face down. But you can only take cards that are basically entirely uncovered by other cards. And then as a card becomes uncovered, if it's face down, then it gets flipped over so you can see what it is. But you're basically going back and forth and taking cards, and you can either take that card and play it and use it for its resources or money or whatever. You can sell it if it's a card your opponent wants, or even just if it's a card that you don't want, you can sell it for money to get some money. You can use it to build a stage of your wonder. Super simple, really fast playing, really solid game. Seven Wonders Duel is like really high up on my top 100. I just really enjoy it. It's just a solid 2-player game. There's different victory conditions, but the game just is so simple. Like there's not weird gimmicky rules and things. I have not had a chance. There's 2 expansions. There's Pantheon and Agora. Pantheon adds deities that you can like from different cultures like Roman and Norse and Greek mythology that you can get to help you that have like god powers. And then there's Agora, which adds like a Senate track, so you can like try to get majority votes in different things in order to sway and get like bonus actions and stuff. Haven't played those yet, but just in reading the rules, they look good and they integrate really well without adding like a bunch more complexity or rules overhead. Yeah, that game has completely replaced Seven Wonders for me. I love Seven Wonders Duel a lot, and I just don't see myself playing this one. So, yeah, that's why it's leaving the collection. Alright, only 3 more games to go. So, number 3 here. Tiny Epic Dungeons. This was my first exposure to Tiny Epic games. I did a full review on this game, and I was very negative. I don't know if it's a great review, but I did a full review on this game, and I did not like it. I have played it, I think, 3 or 4 times, trying to like it. Because it is if you're not familiar with Tiny Epic games, their goal is basically to make, well, very small form factor boxes, really small games that are epic or have like a lot of content and are, enjoyable, but also very travelable. This is very travelable. No complaints there. It looks phenomenal. Phenomenal? Phenomenal. I don't know what that word was. Phenomenal. It's basically a dungeon crawl, so you got your hero characters, you're moving around exploring a dungeon, building it out, and, leveling up your characters, getting better abilities and armor and weapons and things like that, and you're then fighting a boss. Very good in theory. Don't have a problem with it in theory. However, in execution, I do have a problem. This game has its moments where it's not bad. And I understand. I'm not trying to make it. I'm not trying to compare it to, a big old giant dungeon crawl like Bloodborne. I love Bloodborne. Is Bloodborne portable? No. No, Bloodborne is not portable. Is it short? No, it is not short. It is a couple of hours per scenario. But my big problem with this game is that the loop in the game, right? When we talk about like a gameplay loop, right? So. In this one, your gameplay loop, or the way that they pad out the game in order for it to have something for you to do all the time, is that as you're exploring, different goblins will spawn. There are different goblins in the game, like represented by cards that you'll get throughout the game. But it's limited to 4 meeples. So there's 4 goblin meeples. If you ever have 4 on the board and a 5th one would spawn, you'll lose the game. So this means that for the majority of the game's runtime, you are moving around, exploring, and fighting goblins. The same 4 goblins over and over and over again. To the point where there's basically no variety in what you are doing. You are just having to fight these things because if too many of them spawn, you just lose the game. Again, not bad in theory, but in practice, it's very frustrating because after you do it 2 or 3 times, after you've killed each goblin 2 or 3 times, you've seen it. You've seen everything that it has to offer. But you're going to be doing it 50 more times as you explore and work towards the end game condition. So yeah, basically, and then you have this track, so you're timed too, which I like that the game is trying to keep it short, but it almost feels like too claustrophobic because you have a certain amount of time before, your torch runs out, which is cool. It's cool. But sometimes it feels a little claustrophobic, and you have to beat a certain number of like mini bosses, basically, which are the only like varied enemies in the games that aren't just goblins. And yes, there's different goblins. Like I said, there's different cards. They're all basically the same with like 1 extra damage and 1 less health, or 1 more health and 1 extra damage, or 1 less damage, and it's just so tedious. And that's my biggest problem with this game, is that the core loop that you're going to be doing for the majority of the game is fighting these goblins over and over and over and over and over again. Whereas in like a normal dungeon crawl, you'd have different, more variety in enemies. And I understand that they couldn't have a whole bunch of different enemies in this game. It's very small. But then my other problem is, much like Betrayal at House on the Hill, I've heard it in this regard compared to Betrayal at House on the Hill. This was not my idea, but I heard it from another YouTuber I follow, and I felt it was a very apt comparison, is that the boss that you fight at the end has a similar problem to the haunts in Betrayal at House on the Hill, where you can get into situations where it's basically impossible to win, or incredibly difficult. And much like Betrayal at the House on the Hill, I've only played this 3 or 4 times, and at least twice I have gotten into the situation where the boss is nearly impossible. Which to me, I go, well, why do I keep this in my collection? Because if I'm getting into situations where the game was just not play tested, and it was not deemed to be a problem, that there were just scenarios where the boss's abilities were just broken in certain dungeon setups, similar to Betrayal at Hell's on the Hill, where some of the haunts are just like, you could just instantly lose, and there's just nothing you can do about it. For instance, I think I said this in the review too, we were fighting the Beholder, basically, enemy, I think that's what it was. And it has this thing, so enemies are in their lair, so you find them in their lair, and then they leave their lair to attack you, and then they go back into their lair, a lot of the time, or they move towards their lair. This particular boss has an ability where you can taunt it and move it out of its lair, but at the end of its activation, it will immediately go back into its lair. No matter where its lair is, or how far away it is, it will immediately go back into its lair, which isn't necessarily a problem. However, in order to beat the bosses, they're gated, meaning you can knock their health so far, and then it hits this point where in order to get it any farther, you have to get them on these little seals that are in your dungeon that you will have flipped over at some point during your exploration of your dungeon. They're these little magical seals. Cool in theory. Problem. If the boss is really far away from those seals, you have to get him to those seals before he activates. Because once he activates, the Beholder specifically, his ability is that he just teleports back to his lair. Well, we happen to have gotten into a situation where all of these seals, or at least one of them, was really far away from the boss's lair. And it was literally impossible for us to taunt him, which is there's an action in the game you can do to taunt the boss and get it to move towards you. It was impossible for us to taunt him over there before he would activate, and he would just go back to his lair. Maybe it wasn't impossible and I'm misremembering. Either way, it was bloody difficult. And it wasn't from a fun sense, because you're also fighting all the goblins. I think he also spawned a bunch of goblins or something. Anyway, point is, I played this game 4 times, and 2 of the 4 times, specifically, the bosses had abilities that were just not fun to deal with, and not in a challenging way, right? Because there's difficult in a challenging way, and then there's difficult in an unfair and random way. And this leans more towards the unfair side of things. So yeah, that's Tiny Epic Dungeons. I really wanted to like this one. It looks gorgeous. The only reason I'm not super upset about it is because I bought it on Kickstarter and it was only $30 or something for this. The screen printed meeples look so nice, but the gameplay is just not so good. So, I guess I didn't talk about replacements. I don't really have any good dungeon crawlers specifically. I think, I guess maybe that's a reason you'd want to own this game, is if you really want that portable dungeon crawler. I have so many other good portable games that it's not a good enough reason. I would say Burgle Bros is another fantastic game if I had to pick a game that comes in a really small form factor and has you cooperating around a board. Sort of similar to a dungeon crawl, though it technically isn't, because Burgle Bros, there's 3 floors, you need to crack a safe on each floor and then get out. But I played Burgle Bros. I thought it was really fun. The programmatic movement of there's basically a security guard on each floor, and they start each with a die that determines where they're going and how fast they move. And so floor 1, they move 1 space. Floor 2, they move 2 spaces. Floor 3, they move 3 spaces. But they only move if someone on that floor takes a turn. And then they flip a card, and then wherever that card is where you place the die, and then that's where the security guard is moving on their turn. And so you can kind of mostly predict where they're going to go. But the more safes you crack, the faster they start getting. So they increase their speed and they start getting really fast. And by the end of the game, you have some really fast security guards that are able to zip around the board. Burgle Bros to me is a way better version of this game. Gives me a similar vibe without the just ridiculous tediousness that is used to pad this game out and make it an hour long. So that is Tiny Epic Dungeons. Alright, now, after I made you sit through all those other games, we're getting to the last 2, this one and one other. And they're the real reason why I made this video, because these are relatively popular out-of-print games. And that is going to be, first, Fury of Dracula 3rd Edition. This game died when Fantasy Flight lost the Games Workshop contract that allowed them to print Games Workshop games, or IP that Games Workshop had. And I recognize that this game probably is good, or was good. I like the ideas. I like hidden movement games. I think they're fun. I think the idea of like one character being chased by everybody else is really fun. And for those of you who don't know, Fury of Dracula, like I said, is an out-of-print game where one player is playing as Dracula from Bram Stoker's novel, and the other characters are playing as, vampire hunters and trying to hunt Dracula down. And Dracula has all sorts of ways to move around the board hidden and is doing all sorts of devious Dracula things. And the hunters are using various ways to try to corner him on the map. I think there's really good ideas in this game. I think it was probably a pioneer in the whole hidden movement. I believe this is one of the older hidden movement games. It's, like Scotland Yard is definitely older. But I think the problem with this one, where I really want to keep it. I like the theme. I think the theme is represented pretty well. But where I have problems with this game is that it's so dang long. This game says, I think 2 to 3 hours. Yeah, 2 to 3 hours. 3 hours is probably the shortest amount of time you're going to play this game, unless you have a lot of people who are really experienced with it. I found Dracula to be too powerful. A long time ago when we played this, I played as Dracula, and I was able to just consistently evade the other players. Maybe it was luck, but I was able to just constantly be able to. I always had a way to get away, and maybe I misinterpreted the rules. Maybe I got the rules wrong. But that leads me to my second point: is that this game is way too rules heavy. There is a lot of rules in this game, and there's a lot of edge cases and fiddly little things that you have to be flipping through the rule book and trying to figure out. It's not good when your hidden movement game has not only a rule book, but also a rules reference, because you have so many cards and effects that are attempting to be thematic, which is admirable, but end up just being tedious and, I don't know, the game drags way too long. I think if it was shorter, fantastic. But that leads me to games that would replace it. I recently played Sniper Elite, the board game. Fantastic hidden movement game. It is a perfect example of fixing everything I don't like about this game. It's pretty thematic as far as the Sniper Elite video games go. Not that there's a complicated theme there. It's, sniper hunting down Nazis. Very thematic. It does not have, one of my favorite things about Sniper Elite, we may do a full review on it, is that it's just so distilled down into its simplest form. There's not a billion components, there's not a billion cards and events, and they're not just trying to mash in every little thing that they can. It comes with a simple deck of cards, which the sniper player gets a couple of for their objective. And then it comes with the miniatures. There's 3 in each zone for a total of 9, basically squads of soldiers that you control. And if you have more players, then you just divvy up who controls which squad of soldiers. And if you have fewer, if you just play with 2 people, you just control all the red, yellow, and black squads of soldiers. And then the sniper does his thing. And it's just so simple. Even just tracking the actions, you get to do 2 actions with each of your squads of soldiers. You have 2 cubes on the board. It also is the thing that keeps track of how many rounds. The game is basically 20 rounds, so it's 10, and then once the sniper, I think, completes their first of the 2 objectives, I believe, then they get more rounds. But the game is a set number of rounds. You're not just playing till an indefinite thing happens. You're playing for a specific number of rounds. The abilities are printed on a little card. You could practically hand someone the card for this game and be like, here, read this tiny little thick cardboard card. That's how you play the game. Let's begin. The only slightly fiddly things are the rules of how the sniper can move. When they move past enemy units, they have to place noise tokens to show that they walk past a guard. But it's just so simple. It's rare for a Kickstarter game like this, and a game that's not made by a huge company. I think it's their first game. is so streamlined. Like, that's the only word I can use to describe Sniper Elite. It's just streamlined. It's just perfect. It's a perfect amount of time. It's a perfect way to teach people. Like, it's so good. There's also games like Spectre Ops, which is in that same vein where it's very simplified. I don't think I like Spectre Ops quite as much as Sniper Elite, but Spectre Ops is still a lot of fun, and that's a good light. I don't like the theme as much either, but it's a good light hidden movement game. Those I've both played, but even games I haven't played, such as Mind Management and Beast, I'm looking forward to. Beast looks phenomenal. I love the idea that, like, when the hunters of the beast are choosing cards, they are basically, if they don't take, like, the worst, I believe it's like the worst cards for the human characters, the characters that are hunting the beast, like, they're not as good for them, are like the best beast cards. So if they pass on those, then the beast gets better abilities. Like, there's so much interesting potential. I think this game has just not aged very well. Happily play it again with somebody. I have a friend who owns a copy, but I'm really not sad to let this one go. And that is Fury of Dracula 3rd edition. All right, we are finally to the final game, and honestly, the reason that I made this video in the first place, of games leaving my collection, and that is another out-of-print game, Merchant of Venus. I picked this up at a used game store for a very reasonable amount of money. This is a game that goes for, much like Fury of Dracula 3rd edition, this game goes for like close to $100. It's been out of print forever. Good chance it's not coming back, especially since Fantasy Flight has kind of gone down the crapshoot lately. This is going to be a really large game of pick up and deliver. And if you're not familiar with pick up and deliver, it's essentially you can buy goods at one place and sell them at another, and you're trying to make a profit. This is Ferengi, the board game. You are quite literally basically a Ferengi, because the goal of the game is to have the most money at the end. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. There are some really cool things that I like. So your ship, I should say, there are also two games in here. There's the original, this is essentially 2nd edition of Merchant of Venus. There's the original Merchant of Venus, the classic edition, which I have not played, which has some slight changes. And then there is also the new version of Merchant of Venus that Fantasy Flight tweaked and changed and, redid. So the way it works basically is you have your ship and you're going to be traveling around the galaxy. At the beginning of the game, all of the different cultures that and their goods are randomly put around the board. So you have these cards face down, and then when you go there, you basically discover that culture, flip it over, and then build out the market from there. And you get like bonus money for discovering. So there's an incentive to discover and flip over all the different races that you can and things that you can buy goods from. The sort of interesting thing is, so in order to move around this board, right, you've got all these sort of like wacky spaces and things on the board, and there's like hazards, there's like shields and lasers and pirates and all sorts of weird events and things that can happen. It's very wacky sci-fi. You have your ship, and it starts out that you roll 3 dice. All right, you always basically roll 3 dice for your movement. And there's a cool little luck mitigation thing where if you roll a 1, you can place that on what's called your throttle. It's just like a spot on your ship. And then you get to roll a 4th dice. So there's kind of a cool mitigation thing. If you roll a really low 1, you get to roll another die, basically. And then you just add all those dice together, including the ones that you may have placed on your upgrades on your ship, and that's your movement total. That's how far you can move. The other kind of neat thing is you have also, along with your throttle, by default you have a navigation space. And there will be various spaces on the board that can move you in different directions. And it'll say like 1 and 2 moves you this way, and 3 and 4 moves you this way, and 5 and 6 moves you this way. And you can put a die of the value of the direction you want to move there, and then you can move there. Kind of cool. Gives you kind of a little bit of interesting like decision making. There's all sorts of upgrades you can get to your ship. There's like better guns, there's better shields. You can upgrade your cargo spaces on your ship, so you can only hold so much cargo. And then there's you can even get these like upgrades. There's a yellow, red, and then yellow and red one that lets you skip those spaces on the board, so you can basically effectively move farther. A lot of cool stuff. I also really like the market. So every time you sell something to a culture, you flip their market token, and they have 3 different tokens. They have sells for whatever price is printed on it, sells for the high price that's printed on it, or sells for the low price that's printed on it. So every good has like a green, gray, red. And so like green is the higher price, yellow, gray is just like the regular price of the item, and then red is like low, bad market. And like I said, every time you sell, you flip one of those over. So if you sold at a green, if it's a green market and you sold it for an amazing profit, then it might go to gray. And I think that's pretty much it. I liked the game. Okay, so this is where it gets sort of weird. I like the idea of the game. I like pick up and deliver games. I think they're fun. My biggest problem with this game is that not only is it very random and wacky, which is not necessarily a bad thing in a game. I like things like Quacks of Quedlinburg, which is also very random and swingy and wacky. But I think it does it well. This game is close to 3 to 4 hours long. Granted, we had some interruptions, but I think even after interruptions, we calculated that this game was like 4 hours long. Because it is a set number of rounds. It goes for 30 rounds. So regardless of how well or how poorly you're doing or how quickly you play, the game will always be 30 rounds, which is a bizarre choice. And from what I understand, the classic version of the games, the original, non-Fantasy Flight edited one, was not to 30 rounds, but was instead until someone had $2,000 of net, gross income. Which seems like a better idea to me. I think the game would still be really long, though, even with that fact. But the point is, having a specific number of rounds means that after about the first half, I was ready for the game to be done. I didn't hate the gameplay. I didn't. But the gameplay is so simple and so random that I don't want to do it for 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours. If this game was like 60 minutes, 90 minutes... maybe even 2 hours, but that's pushing it. I'd say if this game could get itself down to 90 minutes, that would be fun. But the problem is that you're essentially doing, much like Tiny Epic Dungeons, you're essentially doing the same gameplay loop over and over and over again. Pick up and deliver is a fun mechanic, but there's not enough variety for it to last 2 to 3 to 4 hours. It's so simple, and that's my biggest issue with the game, is that the game is good, it's decent, but I cannot abide by the fact that it lasted 4 hours for us. That is ridiculous. And that's subtracting, like I said, distractions and things like that, and life that was happening at the time. Way too long for a game like this. My recommended replacements for something like this would be, if you really want specifically games that use pick up and deliver. This is like purely pick up and deliver. The only other pure pick up and deliver game I've played would be something like Mint Delivery, which, if you're not familiar with the Mint games, they come in Mint tins. They're a little larger than Mint tins, but that is a pure pick up and deliver game. You go to until somebody gets a certain number of contracts fulfilled. You tally up points. Boom, done in 30 to 45 minutes. Super simple, but it works because pick up and deliver is a simple mechanic, but it's fun. You're fulfilling contracts. So if you want a really cheap game, Mint Delivery, pretty good. Games that use pick up and deliver, but not exclusively pick up and deliver, Xia, Legends of a Drift System, or Western Legends I've played. I've not played Merchants and Marauders, but I feel like that also has pick up and deliver. And my brother just bought Explorers of the North Sea, which I think is also pick up and deliver. Can't review those, can't say whether or not they're better, but I can say Western Legends and Xia both have pick up and deliver mechanics, especially Xia. Again, Xia is a sandbox game. You can do all sorts of things. You can be a pirate. You can be a law enforcement. You can go run around exploring galaxies. You can fall into a sun. You can explode. You can fight other ships. You can fight NPCs. You can trade. You can do missions. You can mine for different resources. You can then sell those resources. So there's a lot of pick up and deliver in the game, mainly in 2 forms. One is mining resources and then selling them to a planet that needs them. And the second is in the missions, which you can do, which are somebody needs to get to X planet. So they start at a certain planet, they need to get to a certain planet. Or delivering goods to a certain planet through the cards, and they'll say like which planet they need, and then the farther the route is, usually the more money you get, which is a good way of doing it because this game does not incorporate how far you have to travel. Xayah, for the most part, does. So it'll say like if you deliver them only one sector, right? Like if the place that you're delivering this person to is really short, it's really close to where you are, you don't get as much money. But if it's all the way on the other side of the galaxy, you're gonna get a bunch of money. Xayah is an amazing game. I love Xayah. I think it's underrated. I know it's not for everybody. There's a lot of die rolling. But the fact that it's a variable length of time, you go to till somebody gets a certain amount of fame points. You can set that. You can set it to 5. You can set it to 20. It's totally up to you. You just decide at the beginning of the game how many victory points you're going to. There's also a billion different ways to get those victory points. You literally get a card in the game that's just victory point, victory. This is how you can get all the victory points. Definitely would recommend it with the expansion, especially if you're planning to do a lot of the pick up and deliver stuff, specifically with resources, as in the base game. If you got 2 planets, one that sold a good for really cheap, and then one that bought it for a lot of money, if you got 2 of those next to each other, you could kind of break the economy and just go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and get a bunch of money. However, in the expansion, it introduces an economy board, so whenever you buy something, the thing next to it basically gets removed. Whenever you put down a cube, another one goes away. So there's an economy that has to be refreshed. So there becomes like demands for certain things as goods shift, and it works really well. It's a nice and elegant way to fix that problem. Definitely recommend Xayah with the expansion, but even without it, I would say it's a better pick up and deliver game. You have other options besides pick up and deliver, and you can choose how long it is. So yeah, I was a little sad. I was really excited to find this because it's worth like $100-something. It is missing a couple tokens. It's a little sun faded on the front, but the tokens are just for the classic game. It could be easily proxied. The cover, I don't really care. But yeah, this is one of those like legendary out of print games that I had heard about, and I was so excited to find it for super cheap. Bought it, played it, and went to everybody around the table. I was like, do we ever want to play this again? And the answer was no. So I said, well, let's make a video and sell it. So if you want to buy it, let me know. But yeah, let me know any games that have left the collection for you and why. Maybe they're games that I have behind me that I do like and that are currently staying in the collection, or maybe not. But always interested to hear what people say. Thanks again for watching. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Until next time.